In our second component, we're going to continue to look at the FDA, but look at a specialized category of dietary supplements. And really, there is enough law and regulation of dietary supplements that it could be its own course, its own complete discussion of what that looks like. And what I'd like to do is go ahead and add it here in terms of misbranding, because a lot of the claims that we see in the readings about First Amendment challenges and the like involve FDA regulations of dietary supplements, because those are the products that generally try and push the boundaries and make really novel, aggressive claims. And so it is good to look at dietary supplements in that context. But given our 6 weeks we have together and so much to cover, we won't get too far into the realm of dietary supplements, as big as that industry is. So we always have to start with definitions, and what are we talking about when we say what a dietary supplement is. And I'm not going to put the definition up on the slide. It was in our reading about First Amendment challenges that gave us the different cases that we'll talk about in terms of First Amendment challenges to dietary supplements. But in general, we have our conventional food definition that we looked at, and we have looked at a couple of times, very broad, including things, even a call out for chewing gum, and really broad. We have this emerging term that you may hear in industry called a functional food. There's such a desire in the market for foods to be in some way more than aroma, taste, and nutrition, and looking to see a better description of what that nutrition is, how that functions in the body, what function that can have in the body. And so we're seeing conventional foods that are not quite getting to the level of dietary supplements, but are making more advanced claims. And so this term has emerged, not a statutory term, but it's something that you may hear as functional foods. And functional foods, for our purposes, are really going to be conventional foods that are making aggressive or novel claims. And then we get into this specialized term in the statutory language. It's in the readings, and you can pull up the subsection FF for dietary supplements. And what's really interesting is that we still have this definition of dietary supplements from the 1906-1938 Act, where a dietary supplement is not really what we think about being today. It truly is, when we're talking about a dietary supplement under the Act, something that supplements the diet. If I'm not getting enough fruits and vegetables, for example, maybe I'm low on folic acid, and so I want to supplement my diet by taking a capsule of folic acid. And that is what the Act has envisioned and really means in that statutory definition. Today we think of dietary supplements as a much broader term for alternative medicine, for herbal medicine, for a whole wide range of things. And that can really get a lot of industry in trouble, because at the core, what we're talking about is something that is regulated as food. And if it's regulated as food, we only eat food through our mouth, so we need to have something that's ingested. There's lots of examples we can talk about where things are going on the skin, inhaled through the nose, put into the eyes, all of these sort of things, and calling themselves dietary supplements. For our purposes, we're not going to get into that discussion, but we just want to make sure that we're on the same page and narrowing our scope of what a dietary supplement is, to think about that traditional vitamin that's swallowed and the nutrients ingested through the stomach. So when we get into dietary supplements, we have, just as we did on the conventional food side, this entire realm of labeling on the principal display panel, the information display panel, and really its own set of requirements. And one of the things that you'll notice right away is we don't have a nutrition fact panel on a dietary supplement. We have a supplement fact panel. And there's all sorts of nuances to labeling dietary supplements. And of course, mislabeling by missing those technicalities can be misbranding. But for our purposes, it's good just to know that there are differences. And we'll get into one of the slides where why these differences matter and why it's important to make sure that you're distinguishing a conventional food from a dietary supplement. But for our purposes, we really do want to get into the constitutional challenges, the Administrative Procedures Act challenges as well. So it's really great to talk about dietary supplements because, as I mentioned, they're the ones that typically are making the claims that we have here. These type of claims that are, again, not talking about the technical, what's in the nutrition fact panel, but actually how this product works for you. Now, the one that you'll probably see most commonly on conventional foods as well as on dietary supplements is nutrient claims. And nutrient claims is something we've seen a really big explosion of. And there's an example on the slide where we talk about if a food product has omega-3 fatty acids, we talk about the nutrient content, and we can talk about what that nutrient means, what the presence of that specific nutrient at that level means. These are all administratively regulated. So there's rules around what nutrient claims you can make. So if you have a new novel ingredient, the FDA is not going to have set a specific nutrient level for that. And so a lot of times you'll see in labels where you'll see the daily value is not set. And that's what we're talking about, what is the recommended daily intake and what's the intake that's in our product. So we don't see a lot of challenge on nutrient claims because they are so technical and regulated by the rules that they don't really get too far out of bounds. And if they do, it's very easy to bring them in because they should follow the rules. Health and qualified health claims are those that we see in the readings. And this is taking our nutrient and applying it to the body and applying it to talk about what that nutrient is traditionally good for. What that nutrient, maybe not traditionally, but scientifically we've demonstrated, as we see in the readings, we have this evidence threshold of what this nutrient does. And so in this example, calcium reduces osteoporosis risk. You'll see some conventional foods that will start to make these claims, again, trying to meet that market demand where people are trying to make a determination, is their cereal good for their cholesterol? Is the ice cream they're going to have a great source of calcium and therefore a great way to reduce the risk of osteoporosis? Those sort of things are starting to expand into conventional foods and as well as dietary supplements. And one of the examples in the reading is green tea. And green tea would be a conventional food or beverage, and it's starting to make these claims even about cancer. So it is something that we're seeing expand, and there's this relationship for health claims about the level of science you need to support and the level of science you need for a qualified health claim. What's important to stop and remember about health and qualified health claims, and we'll get into this, is there needs to be a scientific study. And so if we're going to have a successful challenge to FDA regulation of a qualified health claim, we need to make sure that the science is there to support it. And that's something that's good to pause and to note. The next group of claims really are unique to dietary supplements. Most conventional foods don't talk about this. There's some that will, of course, but for the most part, when we talk about structure function claims, we're really talking about dietary supplements. And this is an area where dietary supplements, you've seen the commercials, you've seen the products on the shelves, really go out there. And what structure function claims are talking about is what either that nutrient that's in the dietary supplement or the dietary supplement as a whole, how it's affecting the structure of the body or how it's affecting the function of the body. And so here, an example is helps promote urinary tract health. So this is having an effect on the structure, the urinary tract, and the function of that urinary tract for normal maintenance and good health. We can think of a lot of examples that are really outlandish, and this is where I spend a lot of time in my practice when I'm with a dietary supplement company, is bringing these claims into check. So pretty unique to dietary supplements, but it won't be unusual to find these on a conventional food product every now and then. So at the very beginning of the reading, you may have noticed that we see this definition of new drug claim. And what the FDA has said is that if a product, and typically we see this with structure function claims, if a product makes a disease claim, and that is a claim that attempts to offer a treatment, a prevention, or a cure for a specific disease. For example, instead of saying helps reduce cholesterol, it would say stops heart attacks. We're mentioning heart attack, specific ailment, condition, disease. We've made a disease claim. And what the FDA has said is that this disease claim leads to what is called a new drug designation. And as we know, just generally of our knowledge of drugs need to go through its own approval process. We've all heard of clinical studies and the like. And so anytime we have a disease claim and this new drug designation, the FDA is saying, bring this claim down to the food claims that we can make, or go seek drug approval. And these claims can be both implied and direct. I gave a direct example about mentioning heart attack, but the FDA has said in several rules, one focused solely on structure function claims, that certain symptoms are so associated with a particular ailment that it is to imply the name of the disease itself. And one example is inflammation. And what the FDA has said is if there's a product that's talking about joints and talking about arthritis, or talking about those sort of areas, rheumatoid arthritis, and you're mentioning inflammation, you can remove, if you just have an image of joints and inflammation, that's enough as if you're implying arthritis, and you've made an implied disease claim, and you have a new drug designation. So that's in part why this is important as well. Not only will the FDA, as we see in the readings, attempt to modify the claims, but they can also prohibit the claims on this basis that it's a new drug. So here's a little bit more information we didn't get really from the readings, but also from the article, but we did get from some of the readings about what claims can be made. So nutrient claims, we're talking about nutrient levels. We again are limited to the regulations. For dietary supplements, it's going to require a disclosure on the supplement facts panel. If we have this on the conventional food products, we'll have that disclosure on the nutrient facts panel. There are, in the regulations, a whole host of requirements on characterizing that nutrient level. Is it high? Is it low? Is it comparative to another product? Is it relative to your product? Everything that we need to know about nutrient claims is in the regulations. And so anytime we want to say high source of fiber, high source of calcium, we need to look at the regulations and make a determination of whether or not that fits with the current rule. So as we see in the article, the health claims and qualified health claims require evaluation and authorization prior to use, and that's why we see so many challenges with these claims. The FDA, as we see in the article, will come back and either add a huge disclaimer, they'll completely prohibit a claim, and so on. And so that's why we see a lot of challenges here, because this is the one type of claim that requires pre-approval. The nutrient claims and the structure function claims do not require pre-approval. So as we mentioned, these have to be based on some sort of scientific evidence. We have two thresholds for this type of evidence, and it has to be some authoritative statement from a scientific body. A lot of times you'll see NIH studies used, but we can use other authoritative studies to support these claims. As I mentioned, these are so widely used. You go into any health food store, you can go into any really grocery store that sells dietary supplements and walk down that aisle, and you'll be really surprised. I always enjoy it when I get flyers in the mail from different grocery stores or different places that are selling or marketing dietary supplements, and I'll go through and I'll read the ads and circle the amount of structure function claims and which ones are in compliance and not. And it's amazing to see what gets put out there. There is this requirement that the claim be substantiated, meaning it also should be supported like a health claim, but there isn't a pre-notification necessarily. You're voluntarily allowed to go and to get an approval for a claim, but most companies don't do that. So we've seen this issue in the first component in talking about misbranding, about where is this jurisdictional boundary between what is a label and what is advertising. And the FTC is supposed to be the area that enforces advertising. And it is unique that it does provide some guidance on claims for dietary supplements. And what has been interesting in that development, they haven't done that necessarily for conventional foods, other than what we saw in the first component, talking about that they will use a reasonableness standard and not the ignorant standard that's used by the FDA in judging misbranding. But here they've actually given specific guidance on dietary supplements, and what we see is there's this little bit of daylight, this sliver of daylight between the guidance that we get from the FTC and the guidance we get from the FDA. So there is this gray area where a claim can be FTC compliant but not FDA compliant. But generally, the FTC has said that the FDA will tell it what is a permissible claim, and the FTC, if it finds one of those violations, will work with the FDA to bring in enforcement action. So it is still a jurisdictional question, and it's one that's more prominent than what we see in conventional food items. So what this slide really I want to get to is it's really important to understand whether or not we're talking about a dietary supplement or a conventional food item, because as we'll get into next week with food additives, there is a standard that additives to food should be generally recognized as safe, what's called GRAS. And there's this distinction of what is recognized as safe for conventional foods is not what's recognized as safe for dietary supplements. And so if the packaging and the way that the product is marketed is pushing that envelope for a conventional food item or conventional beverage, and it starts to look like a dietary supplement, you can move from misbranding issues to adulteration issues. And so it's really important to, at the labeling stage, make sure that the labeling is grounding the product into the category that would keep it away from adulteration. And we see that most with liquid dietary supplements, Monster Energy, 5 Hour Energy, that whole gamut of products out there that is talking about energy drinks, melatonin drinks, hemp drinks. We've seen just an explosion of products that are really pushing that boundary. And we can look and see the comparison for a nutrient facts and a supplement facts. And there's a new guidance document that's just talking on this distinction between liquid dietary supplements and conventional beverages. And you can see on the nutrient facts panel that we have this serving size is 1 can, and then on this energy drink we have the supplement fact panel and it says serving size 1 can. So this is one factor that we're looking at, but if we're looking at this dietary supplement, looking to see if these ingredients would make it adulterated or not, we can call it a conventional food on this factor because it doesn't. What dietary supplement in your cabinet, if we're thinking about a traditional vitamin, has a serving size of 1 can. Most dietary supplements will say 1 capsule, 1 teaspoon, something to that effect. So here we can say this product potentially is a conventional food. It's a conventional food, as we'll talk about next week. Are the food additives approved? So it is an issue where labeling can lead to adulteration issues, so it's important to raise. Again, here's an example of a traditional vitamin, and you see that the serving size is actually down to 1 tablet. So definitely something to think about. So the article was really fantastic in talking about the First Amendment challenges in dietary supplements, and there's a few takeaways that we can get from that. What we see in most of those cases that we were looking at, there was 3 cases, is this blend of a constitutional and a statutory challenge. And that's not uncommon. You have one chance to fight the FDA on this issue if they're bringing disclaimers or prohibiting claims. And so really you're going to throw the kitchen sink at them and make every argument possible and see which one sticks. And so what we saw is a blend of both the free speech elements prevailing as well as the Administrative Procedure Act challenges surviving. And one of the lessons we learned is that the FDA can't just say that claim is prohibited, that claim isn't supported, next, and just move on. The FDA has to provide a rationale, has to provide a reason, explanation for what's occurring, and if it doesn't, then it's meeting this arbitrary and capricious standard that we found, and it's going to be in violation of the APA and invalidated or given back to the agency to say, give us a reason, and then we'll evaluate under the constitutional element whether or not that meets free speech standards. And so what we see is when we're making a claim, dietary supplement or conventional food, we need credible evidence. We don't need the best evidence. It just needs to be something that is scientifically valid. And if we have that, then it's sufficient to make and to support that claim. It's very interesting to see in the cases that the cost-benefit analysis that's proposed, we spent some time talking about economic adulteration, and there we said really that's an economic cheat. We're maybe making a consumer pay more for a product or buy a product because they think it's something else. And here the judge is saying, if we're misleading the consumer into buying a product based on this claim, what's the damage? Okay, they're going to spend that $350, that $10.50 they shouldn't have spent, whatever it is. But if we don't allow the company to make that claim, are we, in essence, putting the company's constitutional rights beneath the economics of, the potential economic harm to the consumer? And what the court is saying, really, we need to elevate free speech above economic damage. So it's interesting that cost-benefit analysis goes on. It's probably not surprising that constitutional rights are going to be trumped, especially in a situation where we don't have physical harm to the consumer. So we see under this commercial speech doctrine is this talk about reasonable fit, also called least restrictive means. Excuse me. And the requirement that the FDA regulate these claims in the least restrictive means possible. So that isn't always going to mean completely banning a claim. And the court is clear in saying it's going to be very narrow circumstances when a claim can be completely banned. And they give the example where there's no qualitative evidence. If there's going to be harm to the consumer, if the potential for the consumer to be misled, we're going to see a very narrow slice of cases where this is going to happen. And because we have this credible evidence standard, the court is saying we have a preference to let that credible evidence be out there, put a disclosure on that, and let the consumer decide. Let's not treat the consumer as ignorant. Let the consumer make the decision. Here's the claim, here's the disclosure, and we'll see that is enough to balance that economic harm and that right to free speech. What's important to see on a lot of these cases is we hear so much about the deference to the agency and providing that deference on their determinations and their actions. We saw that with warning letters in particular. The reviewability of warning letters, there was a big deference to the FDA in making that determination. And what the courts are saying here is we're not going to step in the shoes of FDA in terms of regulating public health and understanding the science of these claims or the science that's supporting these claims, but we will make our own determinations about whether or not the FDA has violated free speech rights or other constitutional rights. And so the FDA's deference only goes so far, which is important because the FDA attempts to occupy the entire field and say what it is about science and as well about the constitutionality of what they're doing. So finally, the two real important lessons that we see is that when we create this disclaimer, we can't have a disclaimer that basically says everything that claim just made is completely false and we don't agree with it. There has to be, again, this reasonable fit, this least restrictive means, and we have to create a disclaimer that allows the consumer to make their own choice and provides an appropriate warning to them to say this scientific evidence isn't the best, this scientific evidence isn't conclusive, whatever that is, but we can't necessarily have a disclaimer that negates, as the court says, that claim that's being met. And then finally what we learn is a lot of times in these areas, if we have a new dietary ingredient, we have some conflicting scientific views on a particular nutrient. What the court is saying is if that evidence is inconclusive, then we have to allow free speech to prevail and to allow the consumer, again, to make that choice based on the evidence. Are they going to say, well, I've looked at the claim, and I've researched it, and now I've made the decision. I'm on the side that says this is a benefit. And so the court says if it's inconclusive, then we have to allow free speech to go. And you can see the breadth of the claims, the breadth of these challenges, and how these cases go back and forth. We have them going once or twice to get the full decision rendered. So it's a very complicated process, and it's one that's going to continue to expand as we look at conventional foods trying to meet the market demand of consumers who want products that are doing more for them than that base of aroma, taste, and nutrition that we've talked about being in traditional food. So this is our entire discussion on dietary supplements, as well as getting into some misbranding for constitutional challenges. What we'll do in the final component is look at the USDA and its radically different model for misbranding and labeling, and then we'll move on to our final two components in the final 2 weeks.